Everybody, my name is Ernesto Ongaro, Tech Talk's host. Welcome to Tech Talk number 4, using Jaspersoft with Big Data. Today's January 8th. This is our first broadcast of the year. We're joined by Matt Dahlman. He's the Senior Technical Manager of Alliances for Jaspersoft. He'll be doing the presentation today. Remember, the format of Tech Talks is that you can submit questions throughout the broadcast, either about the topic or about anything else that you're working on in Jaspersoft that you're looking to get some help on. We are going to kick off the webinar with a poll question, so we're going to get that up now. The question is, does your company currently use big data technology? So in production, in development and R&D, no but planned, or no plans. So we'll give everybody just a few moments to vote, and then we'll hand it over to Matt. So I follow a Twitter feed called DevOps Borat, and he just tweeted, "Big data is anything which is crash Excel." So one more big data definition for you guys out there. It might be my favorite one now. Okay, so looks like most have voted, and we can share the results later on in the broadcast. So we'll hand it over to Matt Dahlman, who's going to take us through his presentation. Thank you, Matt, and welcome.
Hey, thanks very much, Ernesto. Let's take a look. I'm going to, as I go off the first slide here, clarify that I've actually had a haircut since then, so that's not my current photo. But this presentation is one that originally was given in the Jasper world context last year. It's been updated a little bit since then, and so I think it's good. It's a good starting point to launch our discussion of big data in general, and in particular how Jaspersoft will fit into that landscape. And then we'll keep today's talk very informal, as is always true with these tech talks. So hopefully folks will interrupt with questions as we go along. And I know Ernesto's not slow to interrupt folks with questions that come in, and for that matter, I may interrupt myself as we jump into demos and go through the slides and punctuate it with that. So I think we'll probably demo these three technologies that I mentioned: MongoDB, Google BigQuery, and Hadoop Hive. They're some of the most popular big data sources right now. But we may branch off and do others instead, but that's probably a good starting point. So I don't know if Doug Laney's definition here is as good as Big Data Borat's is, but in general, there's not a fantastic definition of big data, but the general idea is that it's stuff that won't fit in your traditional tools. Traditional in this case meaning usually relational databases. And so it opens up new challenges to be able to figure out how to take advantage of that data. The BI tool is an important piece of that, but by no means is it the only piece of figuring out how to handle these very large data sources. Okay, now I'm not going to go through all of the different use cases here, but I like to bring this slide up just to talk about the idea that there are some really varied use cases for big data, and a lot of folks may have a few of them in mind, but not necessarily all of them, or not realize that there's a big range of ways that you can sometimes benefit from big data. So that first one, in my mind, is among the most common. Everyone knows you've got an e-commerce kind of site, you've got a web server and web logs, and these systems can potentially generate big volumes of data. and it's not necessarily easy to make sense of it. There's certain things that you can do pretty easily to just track down pure volume and which pages are most commonly hit and where you've got problems and what countries your visitors are coming from. And so some things like that can be done quite easily, but the more sophisticated analysis can be quite hard. This is the kind of space that there are specialty vendors like, say, someone like Splunk has spent a lot of time working with log files like this. And so there's a lot of interest around that type of use case. But there are others that are maybe less obvious, but that are really super interesting as well, like insurance with customer segmentation to track down, figure out how to group your customers, and therefore figure out ways that you might be able to make offers to different groups of customers that are more appealing and feel more personalized. That's an area that we've seen a lot of growth in recently, a lot of Jaspersoft customers and a lot of growth in that kind of area. Now, one of the ones that we've had more interest in recently, but it's one that I'd say is a little bit less developed than some of the others, is graph data and graph database engines. And this is one where we've recently seen more interest, and we've been developing a Jaspersoft connector for Neo4j and to work with graph engines like that. I would say these are, in some ways, more exciting, more cutting edge than some of the other engines, but in other ways are less focused on analytics. And so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. It's kind of better in some ways and harder in others, and so we'll see if that turns into a really standard use case or if it stays more of a specialized one. But certainly an interesting area to keep your eye on. One, again, that's a little more obvious is machine data, where you've got just huge volumes of sensor data coming in. We've got a lot more devices, either mini devices within the household, smart power meters and things like this, as well as smartphones and items like that. And so this machine data is one I would say in a lot of ways is more obvious, that it's got huge volumes of data. They tend to be somewhat structured. A lot of folks are referring to that as complex data, where it's not what we would call free-form text. You're not doing text analytics on this kind of data. But it's also not really a well-formatted, something that we know exactly how it would fit into a relational table. Each of them could have a different format and individual records in the data set coming back to us could have a different structure. So it tends to be complex data, and we've got to find a way to make sense of that, even though it's maybe not quite as easy to deal with as just a simple, say, CSV that would get bulk loaded into a relational database. And then one that's, I'd say, a lot of times gets more press than others is the pure unstructured data, where you want to just take blogs or tweets or Facebook posts and figure out what folks are saying. Sentiment analysis is one of the common examples here to know for a given topic if it's trending positive or negative. A lot of retailers are focused in this area, and this one's totally valid. I would say it probably gets outsized recognition in the press. It's one use case, but it's not the only one, and it's maybe not even the dominant one, but it's certainly an interesting one to go through big volumes of completely unstructured data and see what information can be pulled from that. Now, one of the use cases that we've had at Jaspersoft was a customer trying to figure out, and so I think this is a good example just to go through some of the different parts of what's involved in figuring out what your big data strategy is going to be. And so here it's a major telco, and they had a pay-per-view event, and they want to know, well, we know what our viewership for this event was. So on the one hand, we can do some analysis around that. Who logged in? Who saw this? How much money do we make? There's a lot of questions you can answer by themselves. But it was much harder to get at information like, well, certain users watched this, but did that mean that they were not doing something else on our network that they would have been doing? And therefore, the benefit of this pay-per-view event was potentially smaller than the raw numbers might suggest. And technically what was going on is they just had this big supply of log data coming in from the pay-per-view event, but they have just completely distinct other logs for what the customers are doing on their mobile phones at that time. Are they logging into this pay-per-view event from their home computer or from their set-top cable box or from their mobile device or what? So they've got these completely distinct systems that for each one of them you could track down what the answer is, but to integrate them all together was not at all obvious. And then in this case, their business question was, all right, well, for the different users that logged in, let's correlate this with what their mobile phone data plan is to figure out if this is a significant thing. Like, did this event use up a big portion of their monthly data plan? And even that, the implications aren't entirely straightforward. If it used up a big percentage, is that a good thing because it's going to push them toward more usage and maybe wanting to upgrade their plan? Or is it a bad thing because they've used up such a big percentage of their plan that they're going to know better next time, never log into pay-per-view events or what? So it's not immediately obvious how to act on these different things, but they know that they want to track this down and extract some real information from this. And so what they needed to do was to be able to join those very large systems together. They're not going to load them into a database. They just didn't have the technology to do that, but they wanted to find a way to keep them separate, but then to be able to run analysis on the two different distinct data sources. Now, I brought up some other customer examples. These are folks that you'll find case studies on the Jaspersoft.com website. I won't go through all the details of these, but it's to let you know that there's a big range of customers working with big data from, I would say probably, as a lot of folks would perhaps guess, Hadoop is one of the big data technologies getting the most press and the most excitement, and that tracks well with the Jaspersoft customer base. I would say we have more big data folks working with Hadoop than with other technologies right now. And you see that with Groupon was getting their crunching through gigantic volumes of data in Hadoop and then visualizing it in Jasperport server. But you're seeing it in other technologies as well. And Tierra was using or is still using Vertica, or HB Vertica, as their relational data source, but tuned to handle big volumes of data. Or and you see other examples there working with MongoDB. So a bunch of different technologies in place and spanning the range of some folks were fine with pre-built reports, sometimes referred to just as canned reports, a little dismissively. But the key idea for them was that they could just run these reports directly against the big data system and not have to do any ETL and move it around. Other folks really wanted to be able to, on the fly, build new reports, and so the ad hoc web interface of Jaspersoft was the key driver. So there's a big range. Some folks care about one of those, but not at all the other, and some are the reverse. So it's I like to be careful to point out that there's not a single answer to where the Jaspersoft might plug into big data. It'll really depend on specific customer needs. Now, with that in mind, we ran some surveys with the Jaspersoft user base to figure out how folks are most interested in using big data, both how they're currently using it and what their plans are like. And we're doing this to make sure that our future plans for product development are matching with the direction that our customer base wants to go. And one of the benefits of being at a company where we're working with such a big customer base through our open source products is that we have access to a pretty big developer base. So it made for a really good group to survey to get a good cross-section of what folks are looking at. And here you can see some of the numbers about who were the folks answering the survey and what kind of industries they were in. Maybe I would say one of the most striking things that we got is shown here on this first slide. The percentage of folks that want to embed this analytics into existing applications. And you can see it's the number one choice. They've got an existing internal application, and they want to embed some BI into it that's able to access these big data sources. And I think that's really important, and I think that's a trend that we're going to see rapidly increasing in the coming, well, certainly in 2013 and in the coming years, that folks are realizing standalone BI, it's not going away. It has a legitimate place, but in some ways it's an old school way of thinking of it, and we just want the BI to be built right into what other applications we've got. Okay, and for how many folks are working with big data, there you see it's a majority of folks that answered our survey are either already using it or planning to use it. And I expect we're going to see the same from the survey that Ernesto ran at the beginning of this presentation. We're going to find out how many folks are working with it, and there's some self-selection bias. If you're coming to this talk today, you've certainly got at least some interest in big data already. But so a majority of folks are at least at the stage of trying to pick which technologies they want to work with and want to track down, should we be working with some of these new big data technologies, or maybe is it overhyped and doesn't really apply to us, but it's really a time to figure out to what extent we can take advantage of these things.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Actually, I can share the results for the survey that we did earlier. So they are actually very, very close to what you're showing there. So 38% answered yes, we have a big data system in production. 15% answered yes, we have big data in our R&D labs or in development. 31% said no, but we're planning on it. And then 15% said no, no plans at all. So around what you're seeing in those numbers is representative of who we have in the audience today.
Okay, all right. So that's good. It's matching up with what we've seen in the past, and I think we're seeing that mix as being typical for folks. It's interesting, and I don't have a good numbers, a good slide for this one right now, but we've seen an interesting comparison with big data and with cloud. In some ways, very distinct technologies, but in a lot of ways overlapping. And cloud computing is one that's they're similar in that they both had lots and lots of hype. One difference we're seeing is that big data has more immediate business benefit for more folks, and so the number of folks moving to the cloud is steadily increasing. There's no doubt about that. But the number of folks trying to get into big data, I would say, is accelerating more rapidly right now. So let's see. Now, the most folks, an overwhelming majority of folks need, and the way we phrased this question was to figure out if they needed gigabytes or terabytes or petabytes or more. And the 86% is reflected that they need terabytes or more of data. And so it's this kind of space. The number who said petabytes or more was quite small, as you might guess, although that's probably a number that will continue to increase. But there's still a big range, whether folks need a few, 1 or 2 terabytes of data or up to tens of terabytes of data. But that's kind of the spot that we're seeing folks right now, where that's a manageable size with big data technologies here without going into super cutting-edge clusters of machines. With current technology, you can get into these terabyte systems really pretty quickly right now. And then the other that I would think was a little bit of a surprise to us and was really one of the reasons we were glad to have been able to run the survey was to find out how quickly folks felt they needed to get the data. When you're bringing in these big volumes of data, maybe it would be okay that you put them into your models and you crunch the data for a while, and maybe it could take hours to come up with some sort of interesting analysis. And and so maybe it'd be okay to take a long time. But in fact, we really need this near real time within seconds, or certainly within minutes, is an overwhelming majority of folks. They've got this data streaming in, and they want to either present it to their users or make decisions to help their users really very quickly. And so that was something that was a little bit surprising to us, and certainly interesting to know that those requirements were so important for folks. All right, now I don't want to go through enlisting all the pros and cons of all these different big data technologies, but I'm going to mention a number of these technologies that all of these are becoming pretty important in the big data world, and there's a lot of overlap. Some can do very similar things, some can do quite distinct things. So don't think of them all as doing this same space. Some would be quite complementary to each other. We try to group them together into a reasonable way. And then, as mentioned right at the beginning, we'll demonstrate some of these today so you get a feel for some of them as they're working. And certainly we'll get some questions from the audience as we go along, letting us know what technologies they're using and how they want to see that working with Jaspersoft. And then here we're seeing specifically some of the partnerships that Jaspersoft has put together, corresponding pretty closely with the last slide we saw about the big data technologies that are out there. You've seen we're working with on the relational side, like the Google BigQuery and Amazon Redshift and Vertica, but also on Hadoop. Within the Hadoop range, there's everything from the big distributions like Hortonworks and Cloudera and IBM, and also smaller players. Treasure Data does hosted Hadoop for folks that don't want to do all the management of it themselves. We've tested with them and shown that the Jaspersoft technologies work just like you'd expect. You can let them manage your Hadoop infrastructure and then just point right at it and do your BI from Jaspersoft. Okay, now let me do a time check with Ernesto to see how we're going along. I don't want to take too long on my slides, and also see if there's any questions coming in that we should answer so far. How are we doing, Ernesto? Am I running over on my slides, or are we okay here?
No, we're good. We're good. Just want to make sure we leave at least maybe 15 minutes for questions at the end. We don't have a ton coming in at the moment. I have one that comes in probably from the last slide. How much BI can you do on a key value store? So if you can take that now, or you can take that during the demo while you show, if you're going to show anything like on Cassandra.
Yeah. It's a really good question, and it goes. So the key value store is a good example, and then I would say if we look at the question slightly more generally, like some of these big data stores are specifically intended for BI, and that is very distinct from others that are very much not. The key value store is a good example of these things are great for taking super high velocity data. You've got inserts from, like let's say you've got an online game and you're tracking everything that's going on in the game. So thousands or millions of users are performing updates, and these are all getting inserted, and Cassandra or HBase or some key value store might be fantastic for this kind of workload. But how much BI can you run on that with the key value store? And it's a really good question. The answer is that there's it's hard to give a precise answer. The answer is some. You can definitely get some really good BI out of that, but by the same token, you cannot just ask arbitrary questions of the key value store, and it'll either be impossible or it'll be prohibitively slow for a big class of questions as well. But we'll take a look at it running. Maybe we'll show Cassandra or one of those. The idea there is that any kind of query that you're able to run against that key value store, you'll be able to run from the Jasperport server side. So I'd say it lends itself better to dashboarding types of things, where you say, all right, show me my most recent actions or my top users or things like that. If the key values if the keys have been set up appropriately, you can get great response time on queries like that and put them into a dashboard, and then from that dashboard drill down into more detailed reports or analysis views. So in that sense, it can tie into BI very nicely. But other times when you want to query to say which users have done certain things over a certain time period, it may well be impossible to do that in the key value store, and in a case like that, you might need to look into an ETL story to load it into more of an analytic database to ask just ad hoc general queries against it. So kind of a long-winded answer to that, and I'll leave it there for now, but we'll come back to it as we do the demonstration of it.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think that's a great answer to that question. I'd say, or to just summarize what you said, maybe more reporting, production reporting would be something you'd do on Cassandra, but traditional business intelligence, you wouldn't replace a relational database and then stick your data warehouse on Cassandra. So thanks for that, and you can continue.
Okay. All right, great. So this slide, I think it's a good one. Folks may want to download these slides afterwards, or I think we have variations of this slide on Jaspersoft.com. And it's a good way to think about the potential problems that you can solve and which ones that you, in particular, need to solve. And so the idea of, on the left side, the interactive exploration, where you just want to expose some data to the end users and let them, they say, I don't even know what questions I've got, but let me sort of poke around with the data. And so you've got that kind of use case, and that can make sense with any of the technologies as long as they're able to provide a low latency response to your query. You may well be constrained by exactly what types of questions you can ask. If you've got something like HBase, it's not going to give you good performance on arbitrary queries, but as long as you you've set up your system so that the users know what questions they're able to ask, or you've only allowed them to ask kind of things that HBase can respond to, you get quick response, and they can just poke around with the data, do range scans based on a row ID or something to bring back data, and then visualize it. So great, just exploring the data. Operational reporting side, for me, a lot of times is kind of gets the short shift. It's not as exciting. Folks say, hey, canned reports. We've been doing that for years and years, and it's true. But they remain really practical. And the key benefit with big data systems is that you're loading these very large volumes of data into the system, like say loading files into HDFS and then putting Hive on top of that. But once you put it there, it can be the master location. The data just stays there, and you can run batch reports, run every night, and the report might take an hour to run, and you don't care. It's then waiting for users in the morning, and they'll get back this pre-crunched set of data that's available for them to either just read or even to work with more interactively afterwards. And then finally on the right, where we don't want any trade-offs as far as what types of queries we can run, we want complete flexibility to run analytic queries. Well, in that case, it can make sense to use ETL to take the data out of, say, the key value store, put it into a more traditional analytic database, and run analytic queries, whether that would be using a built-in OLAP engine or going straight against the SQL database. Probably an arbitrary distinction. Either one of those could be fine, but it gives you the full power. You just, as long as you're okay with this idea of the inherent lag of running an ETL job to load it into the database. So these are, I would say, very complementary systems. So some folks will have a requirement for only some of them, and others for more than one, and they work well together. All right, so let's take a look at some of these systems running in Jaspersoft server, and you get a feel for what types of experience you might be able to offer to your end users with the Jaspersoft technologies. All right, so I'm going to go Let's start out by using MongoDB. I think that'll show a good example of an interactive exploration of data in our ad hoc interface. Actually, before we do the ad hoc interface, let's go with what's in some ways simpler, but just set the stage. I'm going to run a pre-built report. So let's take, I built up a few just technical reports here. Not really good business examples, but they show.
I think we're still seeing the slide. I don't know if you had switched off to another screen or not.
Oh, thank you. Is that coming up better? I must.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. There's your browser.
Okay, I paused. I switched over. Sorry for that. Okay, so I was just browsing out to say, hey, I've got these reports that show technically how we can connect up to a few different big data systems. The reports themselves then are not super exciting, but it gives a look at the technology running here. So in this case, I'm running a query against a MongoDB database. This is something here. I have it in a report. It might lend itself equally well or even better to going into a dashboard. And it does something like, here we're using MongoDB's geospatial, its built-in geospatial functionality to say, all right, show me all users that are near. We pass in longitude and latitude. So that's near San Diego, and it comes back with the nearest customer. Or the second one show me every customer within 10 miles, and it comes back with that. And one thing I like about this is just that it's showing how if the database has this feature, like in this case geospatial queries, or the idea that you can define a circle or a box and identify users within that space, that's not a feature that Jaspersoft has built in, right? We don't have geospatial functionality, but if the database has it, we can take full advantage. So it's a good example of how you fully leverage what you've got in your database. And then here, just bringing back a Google map to say, all right, we brought back the first record. Here's the latitude, longitude, and we zoom into that spot on Google, and then we've got an interactive map that we might, you can imagine we would put pins in it to show where the different users are, or enhance this however we'd want to. Okay, so I wanted to show first just this idea of the pre-built report. So you've got this idea, very useful, maybe not as exciting as some of the other uses, but certainly very practical to give someone this initial pre-built report, and then they could go and filter it and choose just the data they want to see. But what I think gets a lot of the end users more excited is the idea that they can work with this same type of data set, but build up whatever sorts of queries, build up whatever sort of visualization they want to see. So let's start first with MongoDB. And in this case, we've been loading web logs from an Apache server. We've just been loading those as documents into MongoDB. And we can then visualize this in our web-based interface here. And so the difference clearly is that in this case we didn't predefine what the user is going to see. We just built up a query, a topic that chooses what data they can get to, and then the user will choose how to visualize it. So let's say, for example, I want to grab the date, and let's measure how many bytes were served by the client. Here, we'll call this log analysis. And for those of you that are working with older versions of Jaspersoft, you haven't seen this multi-dimensional zoom, I think you'll find it pretty intuitive as you start working with it.
Which version of Jaspersoft are you showing here, Matt?
So I'm working with the current release. It's 5.0, or to be more precise, it's the point release that came out more recently, the 5.0.1. And but the 5.0 shipped, I don't know, maybe in November. Do you know the answer to that, Ernesto?
Yeah, November, December, I don't exactly remember. Another thing, while we're on the topic of MongoDB, do you remember what version MongoDB became officially supported? Just for those of you looking to there was a large percentage of folks that are sort of just researching different technologies, maybe don't have a specific use case yet. Just know that prior to version, was it 4.7 or 4.5 that we added this support officially?
It was the 4.7 release that we added
Okay.
it in
Okay,
here.
so yeah, so just know that MongoDB is officially supported in the product since version 4.7. If you have an older version, you can still install it. Unfortunately, support won't really cover you there. So this actually, since most of the folks in the audience today are our customers, maybe Matt, you can explain a little bit about how all the different not all the different, but in general, when you have a community-based connector, what the process is for getting support around it, and which are the supported sort of platforms.
Okay. Yeah, let me do that. And while I'm talking about that, I brought up on the screen here. So you can see in my case, I have kind of an extreme example where I've installed all of these different connectors. Some of them everyone will know and love, the standard JDBC, JNDI, Java Bean data sources have been in Jaspersoft for years and years. As you mentioned, the Hadoop Hive data source and the MongoDB data source were added in the 4.5 and 4.7 releases, respectively. So that's been about a year. I don't remember exact release dates, but something like that. MongoDB was added right at the beginning of 2012. And then these others are all community-based connectors. Most of them were developed by the Jaspersoft Alliances team and then made public for the community to work with. And so in general, the process, first the technical process to get them and to install them is that you'd get them off the community.jaspersoft website. And in most cases, the install is as simple as unzipping a set of jars and an application context XML file into your your development instance of Jasperport server, and you restart it, and it'll show up in this list here. So in general, it's as simple as that, and then separately there will be a plugin for iReport where you run that plugin, and then you'll get this data source showing up there. I think that might be true in all these cases. Certainly in general, that's what it is. You're just unzipping it there, and then there'll be maybe some little housekeeping details, not to be dismissive of them, but when you've got, say, jar file conflicts, new version of Cassandra connector requires this version of thrift, and Hadoop Hive requires a different version of thrift. You have to sort through those. But in general, it's as simple as just unzipping the stuff into your web INF directory.
Yeah, most people aren't going to be running multiple maybe connectors at once, and so you might be the most extreme case.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to mention that just to not be dismissive, but usually it's as simple as you drop them in there and it should work. And then getting support, as Ernesto was mentioning, in general you'll always get best effort support from the support team here. If you've done your own customization, they're not going to be able to provide official support for something like that. And the same would apply for these community connectors. When you say, hey, there's a bug in the Google BigQuery connector, and they're going to say, well, we don't ship that thing yet. It's not been through QA. They'll give you best effort to try and help track that down. But as important, maybe even more important in a practical sense, is the Alliances team that I'm part of here will be very active in trying to make sure that those connectors are working well. So if you post questions to the forums on the community site, you should expect quick answers, and we'll help you track down any problems with those connectors. So they're outside the scope of standard support until they've been integrated into the product, but as a practical matter, you should get good support on all of them.
Great, thanks for that, Matt.
Okay, and now let's see. Let's go back to the ad hoc interface, and we were starting to look at MongoDB. Here, maybe I'll show a different one as we're starting to just compare and contrast what the functionality is here. So with MongoDB, we were grabbing those fields that came back from the MongoDB database using a very un-SQL-like query. For anyone that's been working with Mongo, you know that they do not have a SQL interface, or for that matter, don't have just a standard query language. They've got great APIs for being able to query data, more flexible than a lot of key value stores, but they don't have just a standard language that you might use. So we've got a JSON-style language to express what data you want to bring back, and then we turn that into the API calls to bring back the data that you want. And that's in a bit of a contrast with the Google BigQuery that I'll choose now. BigQuery takes, we could say, standard SQL for some values of standard, right? It's not 100% ANSI standard SQL, but it's for most practical purposes, you would just call it SQL. It has some additions to standard SQL. It's missing some things that you'd have in it, but it's a pretty good approximation. And in this case, what we've done is set up, but it does not have a JDBC driver, is why you see it available as a special connector rather than just connected via standard JDBC connection. That limitation may go away someday, I don't know, but for now there's no JDBC connector. So here we'll say we would build up a topic, and we'll take a look at that in iReport so you get an idea for what kind of query is in there. Now if we drill down into this, again we can see, all right, well here by default I'm bringing back data. In this case the data set is it's about 150 million records, so it's big by some definitions of big. It's certainly not into the enormously big data size that we've seen for some of these applications, but it's not a trivial data set when it's got hundreds of millions of records. And it's a U.S. government data source where it shows births in the United States in the last 40 years or so. And so I set this up by default. You can see that it comes back with births by state, and it's not indicating when, but that's for, I forget what my default set of years is that it brings this data back for. So it's maybe a reasonable starting point, not a super interesting analysis here, but let's see that how I've set this up. So we've got it set up so you can go and filter what data you're going to bring back. You know, of course, this is the whole point of the ad hoc interface.
Okay, and for those of you, I'm going to interrupt you. For those of you, well, most everybody here knows Jaspersoft, but maybe they don't know what you're showing here. This is a topic that he created in iReport, and what he's showing here are input controls to that topic. They're standard input controls that you can create in iReport. So there's no query generation happening here. He sort of is picking the where clause and the select clause, and I guess maybe you'll show that in iReport.
Yes, I can. I can show exactly what this topic looks like in iReport. It's a good point.
Okay. Well, no, I just wanted to interrupt because it's not obvious how to do this in Jaspersoft. You might be using Jasper Report Server for 5 years, but maybe you knew only about domain-based ad hoc reporting. This would be topic-based ad hoc reporting.
Yeah, it's a good point that you're making, that some folks, especially if your initial data set, you know, you had data in MySQL and all you knew about was using domains to get at that data. That's a reasonable starting point. But it's good to know you can also do, you know, these non-SQL sources, whether they're custom connectors from us or that you would build yourselves. And frankly, I would say this button right here, change the input values, is something that I realized lots of folks did not know about. They didn't know they could set up a topic, and they didn't know they could parameterize it to let us, you know, tweak the SQL as you work with it. So it's a good point. I should be clear about this. This is not new in the 5.0 release, right? This has been around for years, but maybe not well advertised or well presented.
Yeah, I guess the next point maybe that I'll make, and maybe the difference from the MongoDB report and this report, although you kind of have the choice of how you do it, but when you use a topic like this, you can bring an unaggregated data set into memory. So Matt's talking about 150 million rows. you could potentially just ask Google BigQuery for select everything from natality data set. And then you would get back 150 million rows. There would be some load time. We would then, if you have the memory allocated to Java, attempt to store 150 million rows. And then you could do everything that Matt is showing you, grouping, sorting, filtering, and it would happen in memory. It's just not practical with those data sizes. And so, and that's maybe where Matt will actually show the examples, but just know that you have that option. And that's what a lot of this today's tech talk's about, is showing you the different possibilities that you can do. So whether you want our engine to do the aggregation or whether you want to use the aggregation engine of your big data store, we kind of have that covered, and here's some examples. So sorry to keep interrupting you, Matt. I'm just wanting to interject some different thoughts throughout your presentation.
Yeah, no, by all means, that's great. I just wanted to show, in this case, I was using, you think of as kind of the trivial query for a MongoDB, where it's kind of the equivalent of select star from this table.
Okay, so this was the first report you showed, the map one, or, oh no, this is the ad hoc.
This is the ad hoc topic, right? And so in my little demo world, I knew I only had a few tens of thousands of records, and so I just did, like I said, the equivalent of select star. Bring back all the unaggregated data and let Jaspersoft do the aggregation for you on the server. So in that case, it made sense. I know my data set's not too big. Great. And then I could aggregate it by day or whatever field I wanted to group it by. I certainly could parameterize it just like we did in BigQuery. I just didn't happen to in this case. And let's compare that with the Google BigQuery topic that I was showing a moment ago. And in that case, the query language is SQL, and it's just that it's parameterized. So I could say from that drop-down, I would choose dimension 1 being I forget what I chose, the age of the mother, or whether the state that she lived in, or whatever dimension I wanted to choose, and then we would just fill in that parameter in the generated query. So we would get and say, all right, we're going to group by the age of the mother, and we're going to return the age of the mother as that first dimension. So you push the aggregation down to the big data engine, and then let Jaspersoft just do the visualization rather than doing the aggregation.
Yep, that's perfect. That's perfect.
And then maybe the last compare and contrast example here is that first report that I ran, that MongoDB one. If we show something a little bit more complex, let's take a look in that MongoDB, that geospatial report. And you remember that first MongoDB query that I showed was relatively, I mean, it was really simple, actually. It just said bring everything back from a certain collection. Here we're seeing one that's a little bit more involved, where it's saying, all right, it's from the collection called customers, but within that, here's the find query, and we're going to find all the customers that are within a certain parameterized distance from, in this case, a hard-coded center point. More realistically, you'd parameterize all these things. And I did this one in the pre-built report, but you could apply these parameterized queries just as well to topics, and they would be exposed like we saw with Google BigQuery, where the user gets to input whatever values they want, and then the query runs against the server. So in a MongoDB situation, maybe more realistically, where you had big volumes of data, you'd be sure to make it parameterized so that your end users can't shoot themselves in the foot and can't bring back too much data for the system to handle.
Great. And just another sort of announcement about version 5.0 is that we moved our in-memory storage to a different system. And the idea of bringing back a big unaggregated data set don't completely dismiss it. Or like if you have a Hadoop Hive query that takes 20 minutes to run, and yeah, it returns 2 million rows. But using our different caching methods, so there's the caching, so ad hoc has its own caching, and then reports themselves have their own caching. And then we can also now, with version 5.0, bring that cache off heap and potentially distribute it within with multiple machines through Terracotta, I believe it's called. And so, yeah, the possibilities are pretty much what you want them to be. As far as best practice, I'm not sure we can give it to you, just because it's going to change with every different use case, I'd say. So Matt, we're pretty much out of time. We got to move on to a few of the questions that have come in.
Okay.
Unless you had anything else critical to the presentation to show.
No, let's go for questions. You know, I would, given the chance, I'll go on and show some other examples, and we'll connect to Amazon Redshift, and we'll do Cassandra. But I think we've shown a good cross-section of some of the ideas. Let's go to the questions. That'd be great.
Okay, great. The first one is, I have MongoDB. I know that it's a document. It's a schemaless document database is how they advertise it. What does schemaless mean when you're doing reporting?
It's a good question to figure out. This is one of those where the answer from the BI vendor in a bunch of these cases is, hey, if the database can do it, then we can do it. And so schemaless here means that you could put, in effect, any data into a given collection. So there, where we saw that report earlier, where I called the collection logs, and I was bringing back log data that had come from Apache Web Server. Now, with a traditional relational scheme, the table would have been defined. It would have had a certain set of fields, and that's the only data that it could possibly store. With MongoDB, that's no longer true. We could store those first, whatever I had, a few tens of thousands of records that were log data, and then the next record I put in could be anything. It could be, then we'd put in an image, and then we'd store some other arbitrarily different data with different data types and different fields, and so you have the flexibility to put any data into the store at any time. And so the implication for BI then is, our query would still run. In that case, we were. Let me bring up that topic while we talk about it. Our query in this case is defined to bring back a certain set of fields. And so in this case, those are like the IP address, the client IP address, and the browser type, and the byte served, and some of those things that we saw. So if you stick in records that do not have that data, the query will run fine, but it's going to return no value for something like that. So we say, all right, for what we want it to look by port, how many bytes the server served up, and we get something like this, and we can drill down on it. If some of your records have no value in it, that's in a technical sense, that's fine. But what it means in a practical sense is you need to make sure that your collections have a valid semantic meaning, so that it makes sense to run topics against them or run reports against them. So, sorry, kind of a long-winded answer. It just means you need to be careful about bringing. You could potentially bring back lots of null values. You got to make sure you don't do that, or you only do that in cases where it makes sense.
Yep, your answer makes a lot of sense to me. It's in essence, you're doing a search, and you're going to give us the search results. We're not going to do anything magical and return an image. Sometimes there's just no way to aggregate that. So I think just the physics of the world sort of answer that question. It's like if there's no schema, then what would you expect it to do in the best of all cases? Okay, now this one, Matt, is not a question related to big data, but more about Jaspersoft, and it is a bit of a stumper. So we'll take that one and hopefully have room for one more question after that. So I'm trying to build an application where we will have a bunch of clients and we'll be given a set of reports from iReport. So each client gets a set of reports. But each of these reports will be incredibly similar with specific variations. I want to find the best way to centralize reports. I'd like to see this by having a default XML generated for a set of reports and have the possibility of having another XML document to add as sort of an extension to the default XML so I can streamline the creation and generation of reports where each client can have specific details changed based on the extension XML. If you want, I can take a first cut at that, Matt, or if you have, if you've heard this sort of thing before and you just want to go at it.
Well, what I'll mention is that I've had kind of a somewhat similar case, and I think the key ideas here are going to be, in general, our server, the Jaspersoft server, is going to store pre-built JRXML files. They're not going to be modified on the fly. So therefore, in this case where you do want to modify those on the fly, we're probably going to do that outside of the server. And therefore, the system is probably going to look like you've got your base JRXML file. You've got some system for adding in that extension. Whatever that is as simple as some kind of a quick bash kind of a script but some kind of program that'll integrate that extra extension into it, and then make a web services call to upload that variation into the server. So I'm going to expect that that's going to be the general model there. I don't know. What do you think, Ernesto? What other pieces would you?
Yeah. So there's that. There's that. You went to like the most complicated way, I would say, and there is. And Matt Dahlman will do that for those of you in the audience. but rightfully so, because maybe the question does mean that he's aware of all the triggers that we have that you can use. But there are some things maybe that this user's not aware of. So if you could just open up iReport and just open up a banded report, just so I can point out just a few things. Remember that
simpler, harder than this? Is this good?
No, this works. This works. Okay. So remember that everything has an expression. So like Matt there, you're selecting one table element and then you have another table element.
Mm-hmm.
You could potentially stick two of those elements right on top of each other and then have what's called a print when expression. And so then based on some parameter, whether the user is asked that parameter or whether it comes automatically by some other method, maybe it's the time of day, whatever, then only one of those objects will be printed. And you could have potentially hundreds of sub-reports that are included conditionally. You could have, anything like he's doing now. If something is something, then print this out. Otherwise, print out this other one. So that, in my experience with developing reports, has been able to handle it. Now, are there times when you want to just programmatically do some includes or whatever in your JRXML file? Then you have to go to Matt's method, which would be along the lines of some other tool is generating the JRXML. Now, we have great APIs into Jasper Server. I mean, I could write a utility in Python that concatenates different parts of XML files together and then shoots them up to the server via web services. And that can happen all while the user is waiting for the report to come up. So, that's just some of the possibilities. But try to stay within the the world of JXML because it's pretty powerful. The conditional statements. Now, can you do? Now, I don't think you can have an entire like detail band that has a print when, but I could be wrong. Can you do a print when on a band?
Yeah, you can. No problem with that.
Okay, okay. So that, I mean, that right there is it's pretty powerful to be able to say, I've got this detail band, print it whenever you want.
Remember, some folks maybe forget that we have multiple detail bands even, so you can really, you can get a lot of flexibility there. It's true.
Yeah, so we would have to look very specifically at the at your use case, and we post the answers to these questions on the site. There's a few more questions that have come in. Unfortunately, we've now gone over time, and so yeah, do check back on the main Tech Talks page. We do check for the upcoming. Oh, could you post that? Could you post that page? Okay, so we're going to post it into the chat, the page that you can get to those, and then also be aware of the upcoming shows. So next week we have a very special set of guests. Not that you're not very special, Matt. You are very special.
You,
yeah. So we have the Jaspersoft Studio developers. Now these are some of the developers that originally wrote iReport. Some almost 10 years ago now. They're developing a new product called Jaspersoft Studio, in case you haven't checked it out. It is available on the community site as a sort of beta product. So they're going to be showing next week. It's at 10 o'clock GMT, meaning in London. So that will be, what time would that be in San Francisco? That's about 4 p.m. I believe. So you can see that. So do register for that one. Let's see. Then the next one is January 22nd, embedding Jaspersoft in your PHP application, and that one is at the same time this one. It was 10 a.m. Pacific time. Okay, great. So everybody, thanks for joining. Thank you for your questions, your participation, and most of all, really thank you, Matt, for your excellent presentation today. And thanks for joining Tech Talk number 4.
Okay,